what happens when you're in the web, the spider web of meth addiction? And where does it go from there? Now, I've got a very beautiful guest today, and all I'm going to say is from junkie to judge. And now, that on its own makes you want to just sit back and listen, because your interest should be piqued already. This is Carina from Break Fear, Find Freedom, and our beautiful guest today is Mary Beth O'Connor. Hello, Mary Beth.
Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Mary Beth, tell me a bit about Mary Beth, and we know you wrote a book called From Junkie to Judge, right? Let's talk a bit about your meth addiction, how you were in that, how you found yourself in that world of darkness and webs and spiders and all those things. I mean, of course, I'm talking metaphorically right now. And then we'll take it from there.
Well, I mean, I'd like to say that my story started out unusual, but the truth is that it's common in the sense that it was child abuse that led to childhood addiction. And so if you see someone struggling with something like, a serious meth addiction when they're young, that's very likely the cause, or it's untreated mental health, right? Which I also had PTSD and I didn't know it, but it was all because I grew up in a really physically violent, sexually violent, verbally, emotionally, just a very high stress environment. And that sort of primed me that when I found drugs, and my first drug wasn't meth, of course, it was alcohol.
Yes.
A very sweet wine in the U.S., that Boone's Farm strawberry wine, which is sort of a popular introductory drug. But what I noticed about it was that it made me feel better. Like in the beginning, the drugs work, right? I mean, I felt sort of looser, like I was more relaxed. I was giggling with my girlfriend, and I just felt sort of a happiness that I didn't remember ever having experienced, and that just really caught my attention.
Yes.
This is a really positive experience. I want more of this, and so I pursued it right away. But that was sort of what was underneath it. It seemed to be a good pain management tool. It sort of numbs you out, but at the same time, it lets you sort of engage with people and have fun conversations in a new way. And so it's sort of that double whammy.
Yes. So it's almost it's hide. You can hide behind it, because then you don't have to look at all the abuse or whatever's happening at home. And how do you cope with it as a young child? I mean, how old were you?
I mean, I was 12 when I found alcohol, but the abuse in my house had started from the beginning. Although, my mother was abusive. She really also just wasn't bonded to me. But things got a lot worse when I was 9, because she married my stepfather, and he was the one who was sexually abusive. And he was very violent with her, much more violent with me than she had been. And so that was definitely a big escalation point and sort of the stress that I was living under. So that was when I was 9, and by 12 is when I started drinking.
Oh, okay. So that was like a turnaround, because now almost you have this Dutch courage. I don't know why they call it Dutch courage, right? But they call it Dutch courage, where you can go out and become almost a normal person.
Yeah, I mean, it helps keep the pain down, so you don't have to look at it or really experience it as much. But it is also those fun days. But I also pursued alcohol right away. I mean, I was like looking for opportunities to drink, making opportunities. I would even steal beer from that dangerous stepfather, because that's how much I wanted the alcohol. And then also I quickly added in other drugs. I mean, I started smoking weed when I was around 13. There were pills around. And my sophomore year of high school, I did a lot of acid, LSD. And then I found meth at 16. And so it was a pretty fast escalation. I never used normally. I always used at sort of a high rate. And I was always very focused on getting more opportunities to drink and use other drugs.
And how did that change your life at home?
Well, I mean, the truth is, at home, nobody was paying attention to me in sort of the positive way. Like, it wasn't like a good parent who would notice, my child's behavior has changed. She's losing weight, she looks gray. She's acting more aggressively. Maybe something's going on. There was none of that, because they weren't focused. But it did make it easier to be at home. But I also started I started not going home a lot. Like when I was using meth and staying up, I would just not go home for days at a time. And it was interesting because the people who noticed that I was perhaps using too much were the other drug users. Like the other drug users in my sort of group in my small hometown. So they were the ones who were saying, Mary Beth, I think you might need to slow down. Mary Beth, why don't you go home and go to sleep? Like they were the ones who noticed. But they were my friends. It's, it's sort of drug dealers that you're interacting with, but it's a community in a certain way, right? And so those were the people who were really a little bit concerned with the other drug users.
Well, it's quite interesting how communities built around similar kind of feelings, because I'm sure a lot of them that were using at that time had similar kind of environment that they were trying to escape from as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, don't get me wrong. Most people use drugs in moderation, right? So most of the people who were smoking weed or drinking, they were using it maybe on the weekend. They might get drunk, but they weren't doing it on a more regular basis or, really getting out of control. So there were the people that were prone to addiction were in the group, but then there were definitely other people like me. And over time, you sort of filter out the people who are casual users and you spend more and more of your time with the people who use like you, because then it's normalized. We're all doing it at the same level. Plus, that was the group that was always interested in getting more and what the new drug was that was coming around. And so, like, those were really my people. So at the high end of drug use, those are my people. Those are the people that I pursued.
It's quite interesting how you normalize. You came from that abusive environment, which was normal for you, and then you normalize the drug abuse or the drug use, or substance use, or whatever it was.
That's true. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was the late 70s, and there was a lot of drug use around, and it was common for people to smoke weed and drink, and even like do LSD once in a while or something. But I will say that meth became a sort of a game changer in the group. It filtered people into two separate groups. So methamphetamine had existed, but in my home area in New Jersey on the East Coast of the United States, it wasn't around in volume until the time that I found it. So around 77, 78, it was something being mass produced. And so when I found meth was the first sort of overflow of like meth was everywhere. Like it was very readily accessible for the first time. And so that really, at first people thought, it's not heroin, right? So it's not a problem. But there was, within, I'd say, 6 months of meth being around at that level, there was a group of us who were starting to have problems, and we were sort of filtered off in our own little, like, really meth-focused group. Like, I was very committed to meth once I found it. Like, that was definitely what I wanted. And so we sort of peeled off of the more casual users, and we were off in our, crazy, constant meth use group.
Yes. So, of course, with that came, like, stealing, obviously if you don't want to answer the questions, it's fine, but stealing and all sorts of things, because you'll do anything to get that high, right?
Well, I was a young, pretty woman, and so if I stole drugs, it was from other, like, drug dealers. I didn't, steal from people, because it was just that readily accessible. And it also isn't the most expensive of drugs, and so, it's you can get a lot for a relative low cost. And today it's actually cheaper than it was in those days, but it was readily available. I mean, I knew a lot of people, a lot of my guy friends. I dated a lot of the guys. I went hang around with the guys. So it was pretty easy to get. I didn't have to steal from my family or anything like that. But certainly drug use can cause people to make choices they're not proud of. And for me, some of those choices were like who I had sex with, not always proud about those choices. Or even just the way I behave, because when you're up for a couple of days, you can be really aggressive and irritable and, not necessarily friendly, mean to people, those kind of behaviors. So I don't want to imply my behavior was perfect. It was definitely not. But it was in sort of a different area than the problem of having enough access to meth.
Yes. So what was the breaking point? What happened? How long did this continue? What happened at home? Or did they just like, oh, well, she's not here, so what?
Yeah, so like I had always, despite all the craziness at home, my sort of one special place had always been school. And so I'd always done really well at school. And I was from a working class family. Nobody in my family had gone to college, but I was always planning on it. And I started using meth at 17, and I was in pretty bad shape with meth when I graduated from high school. But I did leave New Jersey and came to California to go to college. I went to Berkeley. And for the first 3.5 years of college, I did better with my drug use. And I always say better and good are two different words. Worse than the people around me, chaotically, but still improved compared to what I was doing like my senior year of high school. But I had some really bad experiences in college, like a really bad kidnapping and rape, and I had a violent boyfriend. And so my senior year of college, I sort of like lost the little bit of grip I had on my drug use, and I started using meth again on a daily basis. And I didn't get sober till I was 32, so it was a really long haul for me.
Wow, wow. And it's, I just want to see, I love to see patterns. It's quite interesting how you were brought up in this abusive family with that abusive stepfather, and then you went in and you got involved with an abusive man.
Yes, yes. Yeah, but that's common. I mean, part of it is that he grew up in an abusive household too. And so
Yeah.
there was sort of that mutual understanding, sort of like that war buddy bond or that trauma bond, I guess I would call it. And also, his level of abuse to me was a lot less than my stepfather's. And so in my mind, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that I was happy about it, but it was semi-normalized to me because I had grown up with it. And also there is sort of there's like an adrenaline rush from being in those situations. I was used to sort of high stress, high energy environment, and that's what he provided. Sort of that chaos was normal to me, and living without the chaos felt odd, like I didn't understand it. And so there were nice guys that I went out with, and they just couldn't capture my attention, because it just was too calm for me. Like it just didn't appeal. But it is often common that women who have been abused at home do often choose abusive partners, at least initially in their life. Hopefully we learn how to deal with our trauma and move past it. But when we're young, that's a common pattern.
Yes, yes. So, what happened with you? So, was that just the first? Did you actually attract any more abuse? Because you were talking about how it's like a rush, and you don't know what's going to happen, and the chaos and the meth addiction and everything. You need that adrenaline rush all the time. Did you have some more of those abusive boyfriends after that, or because you were still in the cycle of meth use?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I was with that boyfriend for I think 2.5 or 3 years, so that was a fairly lengthy relationship. And then my next relationship was actually with a good guy. He was much calmer, much more stable. But and so I got together with him at the end of my senior year of college, and he used drugs, but he didn't use drugs like I did, like. And so when we were dating, I was very careful to get him to think that I was like a weekend drug user like he was, like I really worked hard to create that impression. But then when we moved in together, after a while, he realized, no, I was not, and so that created a lot of conflict. But we stuck it out for a couple of years. But at 32, by 32, I really was in a bad place. Like I was having some physical problems from the meth. I couldn't hold a job. I mean, my term is I didn't work my way up the corporate ladder after college. I worked my way down the corporate ladder.
I'm not surprised.
Because I couldn't hold a job. But I was also just miserable and feeling trapped, and I felt hopeless. And then this good guy was done. Like he was done. He was ready to throw me out. And so at 32, it was sort of all of those things together that made me finally say, well, maybe I ought to go to rehab.
So, did you just wake up one morning and go like, okay, maybe it's time to relook at my life and go to rehab?
No, and I mean the truth is, I know in the movies there's sort of like this epiphany moment, and people are like 100% sure they're going to turn their life. But in reality, I think my experience is common, which is there's an ambivalence, right? I mean, first of all, I didn't actually believe I could stop using completely. Like that was sort of just beyond my imagination. It wasn't that I
Yes.
enjoyed my life, but I couldn't imagine actually stopping. And so I was thinking about, well, maybe if I go to rehab, they can teach me, I can get improved, like use less, not as chaotically. And then therefore my life will be less chaotic. It wasn't that I wanted to keep using it, just I couldn't imagine stopping completely. And then also I was very afraid of going to rehab because remember, I mean, my drug use was a pain management tool. And I always knew that the violence was underneath my drug use. And the thought of not having that, that tempering down, you know, of my emotions, like how was I going to handle it?
Yes.
My pain without the drugs. Like that was my biggest fear. I really thought I'd probably have a psychotic break or I'd commit suicide, or I just couldn't imagine a healthy way, you know, to deal with that pain. And so I was very afraid of what it would mean to stop using the drugs.
And I think that's probably a common theme because a lot of times people we use the drugs so that we don't have to feel that pain, because we also know that if that emotion or that anger or whatever it is comes up, you could have an explosion, and then what? So what happened? What happened then?
Well, so, and I'll say a couple of things with that too. Also, I also didn't know it, but I had PTSD from all the violence, and I had very severe anxiety, and that's common. So a very high percentage, like over half of the people that get go in for treatment for substance use disorder, which is the modern name for addiction, they also have another mental health condition in addition to their substance use disorder, and I did too. And so part of what I needed to do when I got home from rehab was I started working with a trauma specialist, a therapist with expertise in trauma. And so that was a really important part of my recovery that we can talk about. But on the rehab side, I went inpatient. And so not everybody needs to go to an inpatient program, but today we talk about substance use disorder on a spectrum, like mild, moderate, or severe, you know. And if I take the test, you know, the current modern test, the diagnostic test, like as if it was the day before I went to rehab, I end up at the very severe end of that spectrum. And so even today, they would tell me that I should go inpatient because of the severity of my addiction. And so I went into a longer term women's program. And it was 90 days minimum, although I stayed a bit longer than that. So that was sort of the first step for me.
That's great. And then what happened when you got out?
Well, so part of the problem started when I was in, because my rehab, I didn't know it because I'm thinking rehab, it's like medical treatment, right? I'm going to go in and get medical treatment for my medical condition. But my rehab, and this is in 1993, although it's still true a lot of places today. But when I got there, I learned to my surprise that my rehab was 100% 12 steps. And 12 steps is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the anonymouses. And 12 steps is a good fit for many people, but it's not a good fit for many others. And it was not a good fit for me. And I told them that over and over, and I gave them reasons why it wasn't a good fit. And they kept telling me that I had to just do what they told me. They told me there is nothing else. There's no other options. Do what we say or you're going to fail. They told me repeatedly, you're going to fail, you're going to fail, you're going to fail. Wow. And that was a real shocker because I couldn't do what they told me and I didn't want to do what they told me. Like, I don't believe in a higher power. But also, there's a very big focus on defects in 12 steps. You got to agree that you're powerless and turn over your will in life. And again, some people do well with that program, but that was not going to be effective for me. And so when I got home from rehab, and I'll emphasize to the younger viewers that it's now 94 and there's still no Google. Okay, there's no Google.
Right.
It doesn't exist. And so what I started thinking, is it true that there's no other options? And so I actually went and got my program to the library, and I found alternatives even in 1994. And so that was a big part of my recovery, was finding more self-empowered approaches, more of an, I built what today we would call an individual recovery plan, a personal recovery plan.
Yes.
And so that was really my foundation. And I do have 30 years of sobriety now. So I think,
wow.
I think I did a pretty good job of building that foundation.
Congratulations, that's an amazing feat, considering how long you were using. So tell me a bit about your recovery, because I know a lot of people use the 12 step, and that's a personal thing, and let's leave that uh, aside. What was worked for you?
So when they told me I had to do 12 steps and I knew I couldn't, that my first reaction, well, besides fear, because they really
Yes,
scared me, but my first reaction was, okay, well, look, if they're telling me that's all there is, let me look for the parts I can use, and in rehab. So I mean, I started out by sort of taking ownership. So I did all the homework in rehab. I wrote what they wanted me to write, and they taught me some good things. They taught us some of the science of addiction. I got a little bit of therapy. They taught us things like how to recognize triggers and things like that. And
yes,
I
yes,
I
yes.
did read all the AA Big Book, and I read all of the Narcotics Anonymous book, and I was looking at it like, is there any idea in here that I can use? Okay, I don't agree with the powerless step, but is there any
Yes.
concept in there that I can use? And so, like, for powerless, I thought about it and I said, well, I don't agree I'm powerless over my addiction, but what I could agree is that I am powerless to moderate. Like, there's no moderate. And so I really sort of, from the beginning, I viewed myself as sort of the decision maker in my recovery, but
Nice.
also that it was sort of my job to listen and to pay attention and to sort of think about what was being presented. In other words, not just to shut my ears because it wasn't the perfect fit, or not just to reject everything that people said. I mean, even at 12-step meetings, they used to have smoke breaks, and I think some still do. I would be listening if somebody said like a strategy during the smoke break. I'm paying attention. And so part of what worked for me is that I viewed myself as the decision maker, but at the same time respected other people had success. They may have good ideas, good suggestions that I should be paying attention to. So that was
Yes.
definitely a big part of it.
Yes, yes, and that's so important in anything, I guess, is to actually have that active listening where you're listening and you don't. That's an amazing feat as well. To just because a lot of people, if you find pushback and you think, oh, this isn't working for me, a lot of people withdraw and say, well, you know what, I don't care. I'm withdrawing, and that's it. Whereas you found the good and you worked with it, which is amazing already. So what happened then?
I mean, so then I also started on the trauma work, and that was real. I mean, I knew that if I didn't start dealing with all the violence in my past and the
Yes,
pain from that, I knew I was never going to be happy. Like, I probably couldn't have stayed sober. I mean, I probably couldn't have stayed sober, or I definitely wasn't going to live a happy and productive life. And so I did find a therapist with trauma expertise and a little bit of addiction knowledge. And I did individual therapy for 3 years, and I did anxiety medication for a while. Because for me, my PTSD, the biggest symptom of it was very severe anxiety. I mean, very severe anxiety. And then I did group therapy after individual for 6 more years. It was a group of women with trauma histories. And that was a real sort of next level of healing for me, because they were further along in the recovery process than I was. And so they really they showed me as an example of that recovery, but also they were making connections between sort of their current behavior and their current pain and their past in ways that I hadn't yet connected.
yes,
And so
yes,
they were offering me an example of increasing my understanding of all of the nuances of the ripple effects of the violence. And so I will say my substance recovery was a lot faster than my trauma recovery. And I think that's common. I really never struggled with substances after about 2.5 years sober, but it took me, as I said, a lot more years to get my what I consider reasonable control over my anxiety. No,
yes,
but I don't want to scare people. It wasn't like 9 years of horrible and then a light switch, right? It's better, 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 better. But it took longer to get to a good place with my PTSD.
yes. Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, considering where you came from, it's amazing that you got to where you did. But again, it's about being open and taking responsibility for your life and saying, no, this is my life. This is what I need to do for myself, right?
Yes, yes. Now, I will say, I don't want to make it sound like I was all like, happy about all this. I mean, I
No.
was, I was not happy to be 32 years old and where I was, right? I mean, I felt ancient. I had wasted my education. I just had wasted. you have this feeling of I want to like sort of hurry up and catch up on what I lost or what I could have had, but hurrying up is not always the right strategy. I mean, I needed to sort of start where I was and be realistic about what I could accomplish in one amount of time. And I did it, but I was not happy about it. Like I struggled with the loss, right? With the losses of what could have been if I wouldn't have spent 10 years after college in the midst of my drug addiction. So I don't want to make it sound like I was some angel or saint. It was a challenge at times. And also my behavior, like my interpersonal skills, they were terrible. I mean, I was not the best communicator. I was not a good listener. There were a lot of areas I needed to work on.
Well, in all fairness, you didn't have that kind, and I'm not making excuses, I'm just saying, you didn't have that growing up, and then you started using at 9. What did you really learn in all that time except how to use, right? In all fairness. So,
Yeah.
and again, you took responsibility for it, which is amazing, because a lot of people would say, I can't do this and that's it, and walk away from themselves because it's hard. I'm not saying I'm sure it wasn't easy.
Yeah, it is hard. And I will add, I didn't have perfect abstinence from day one. Most people do not have perfect abstinence from day one. You just don't have the skill set. And so I used meth 3 times in my first 5 months, and then the clock, got my sobriety date that turned into 30 years. And I always want to own that. First of all, look, 3 times in 5 months was way better. Like that was a vast improvement, right? And so,
Right.
and sometimes in some recovery circles, it's presented like that was I failed, and then succeeded. And that's not how I view it at all. I view it as my brain was, telling me I needed to use, and I didn't really have the skills to handle all situations. And so, I mean, the truth is, a lot of recovery success is really practice, right? You learn more skills. You've been in that circumstance before and figured out how to not drink or not use, or you've had that feeling before and you learn how to address it without turning to a substance. So a big part of long-term sobriety is actually gaining skills. And so in the beginning, we don't always have them. And so I did use 3 times in the first 5 months, and then the clock started on my 30 years.
And did you ever relapse after that?
No, and that was the last time. But I didn't know at the time it was going to be the last time, right? I mean,
yes.
There was one time after that where I drove to a drug dealer's house and he wasn't home, and I just said, "Oh well," and I went home. Like I didn't keep looking, you know what I mean? Like there was one time after that where I wasn't motivated enough to go like to the second or third person's house, but but that was the last effort, and then the clock ticked. And the other thing I emphasize is, but going from 29 to 30 years, that was, that's a milestone, 30 years. But going from 29 to 30 isn't the hard part, right? I mean, the most of the work is in the first 18 to 36 months. That's where people are getting their foundation built. That's where they're struggling with the cravings that later usually don't have that same level of craving. That's where they're learning how to deal with their other mental health conditions or their trauma or their pain over the losses and all of that. And so it's really usually those first 18 to 36 months that require sort of that hyper level of focus. And I will say there's good data, like I hear numbers like, oh, only 5% of people recover or 15%. And it's actually not true. If you hit 5 years of continuous sobriety, you have an 85% chance of never relapsing again. And the other side of that is that in their lifetime, about 75% of people do recover. They do recover. It's just it just may take more than one effort, but in the lifetime, it's a high number.
Yes. And that's really positive, and you feel like, oh, there is hope, right?
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
So I love that. Now I want to, I just had this vision, sorry, I know it's not funny, but it's just this vision of you driving around, and as Providence was on your side then, whatever, the universe, whatever, because he wasn't there or she wasn't there. and obviously you didn't have that craving enough, because, that craving is insane. So that was a win for you. a big one, right?
Yeah, and if it wasn't that time, even if I would have used that time, that probably would have, been the last time because I was building up my skills. And I will say, I mean, look, life happens. I've had a lot of hard things happen in my 30 years. I mean, my best friend died of a heroin overdose. I mean, there was a lot of pain, conflict, fears. But the point is, this is when I had to learn. What I had to learn to really get settled in my sobriety was that bad things will happen. My anxiety told me, my hyper anxiety told me that I had to try to control everything, because if any little thing went wrong, like the whole world was going to explode. But what
Yes,
I had to
yes.
learn over time was, no, bad things will happen. What I have to learn is to trust that I can handle them. Not necessarily handle them without pain or without struggle, but I can handle them. And that was something I didn't really understand, because I didn't see people around me handle anything. I saw them, explode and scream and yell. And so it took a while for me to really absorb that it's not that we're going to get a life without problems or without pain or without loss. It's that we have to learn that we can actually manage these things when they happen.
Yes, yes, and that's amazing. And of course, that's what makes us grow anyway. The challenges, and it makes life. And I know this sounds really weird, but it just makes life interesting, right? Because we can grow from it and see, wow, that's a blessing in the end, because this is where I'm at because of it. So
Yeah. I mean, no, there are some things we don't want to have happen like
no,
to have to grow from, but at the same time, I mean, there is no life on this earth that's, pain free, right? That life just doesn't exist. So we have to learn how to make our way through it. And part of that's like having good friends and support and, and having people to turn to when you're struggling. I mean, that is part of what they emphasize in recovery, is building that network. And that kind of a network helps all of us, whether we have an addiction or trauma history or whatever. Having the people that we can turn to when we need them is a big part of being able to manage the stresses of life.
yes, yes, yes. And that must have been very hard, because obviously, so well, you had a bit of a community while you were using, but it's a very lonely kind of existence, right? Because at the end, you just care about getting that high. So already, even that was a learned response to be able to trust and say, okay, I can trust this person, or I can give up, and I can ask for help, or I can see that I'm not alone.
Yes. I mean, part of it is that I also, when I'm using, I can't be a good friend to you. You know what I mean? I mean, I can't be there for you because I can't focus on you unless you catch me at just the right time.
Yes, yes.
I can't do it. And so, I mean, I had some loving relationships, but still, we weren't able to be there for each other in the way that you can in sobriety, in the way that you can in regular life. But it was hard for me to ask for help. It's still sometimes hard for me to ask for help. I'm just not, wired that way. I didn't have anybody to turn to when I was young. And so I didn't really experience it. I relied on myself. And that's still a bit of a challenge. But, my partner and I mean, he was ready to throw me out. But once I went to rehab, he actually did let me come back to the house, where we lived. And he wasn't making any promises, but he waited to see if I was going to actually, succeed and move forward. And we are actually still together today. And
Wow.
So, yeah.
I love that. That is so amazing. Because obviously he also got sober, because he was also using at the time, right?
He was using, but he never used it in a problematic way. So he didn't have to get sober because he wasn't, he was a casual user. Now I will say that for the first 2 years of my sobriety, I did have him clear all the alcohol and everything else out of the house, because what I didn't want was like an impulse relapse. You know what I mean?
Yes,
that I would
yes,
just go to
yes.
the refrigerator. But after that, I said, okay, I think it's all right. You can move it back in, and he still, does things here and there, but he was, what we call normie, right? He was a person who used at a regular level, not a problematic level. So,
Yes.
but yeah, I did need him to support my sobriety in the beginning by clearing everything out of the house.
Yes. Well, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that you're still together, and that he supported you during that time, because it must have been seriously hard, and a lot of times relationships break up because of that. So
It's true. It's true. I mean, we did do couples counseling for like 2 years. I mean, we needed to, to learn things, and we were both frustrated and angry, and we didn't know how to communicate. So, I mean, it was
yes,
definitely a lot of work, but we were able to work it through. So, but you're right. I mean, when one person gets sober, that can change the relationship a lot, and a lot of relationships don't make it through. But it is definitely possible if your partner is actually a supportive, loving partner who's going to support your sobriety, right? That's the key, right? Are they going to actually help you? Or are they going to create obstacles? If they're creating obstacles, they may not be the person you want
no.
to work it out with.
Yes, because a lot of times people get clean, they come out of rehab and then go into the same environment and triggers, and then they just relapse. So you were lucky in a way that you had that support. So
Yeah, I was lucky, and I mean, I was also lucky that like I had a stable household to go to. That he was a safe person, right? Not everybody, like some of the women in my rehab. I mean, their boyfriends were not physically safe. I mean, they were verbally or physically abusive, or they were going back to families that really didn't respect them. I mean, not
yes,
everybody has as safe of an environment to go home to as I did, and that definitely was helpful. I mean, the data does show that if you have supportive friends and family when you're getting sober, that your odds of success are higher. If you feel like you have loving people around you, even if they don't know a lot or can't be a direct help or like offering advice and guidance, just feeling that you have that loving support around you can really make a big difference.
yes. And so did you learn, I know you just mentioned that you're not so good in asking for help. So are you getting better and better with that?
I'm better, and especially with my husband, because once you're together as long as we are, there's that sort of shorthand, and so there's nothing I like wouldn't tell him or let him know was going on with me, and so yeah, I'm better. I'm definitely better.
So now you're clean, you're sober. What happened next? Because we've got, the story here is from junkie to judge. What happened?
So professionally, so remember I told you how I worked my way down the corporate ladder, right?
Yes.
So I get sober. I'm 32. I have a degree from Berkeley and actually good grades and an embarrassing resume. I mean, an embarrassing resume. And so, I mean, again, I would have liked at 32 to start like a career job, but I wasn't. First of all, nobody was going to hire me for a career job, but I really wasn't ready. And so when I got home, my first job was a part-time, low-level, temporary administrative job. Because honestly, for me to like get up and go to work every day on time and stay all the hours, like I hadn't really done that. I hadn't been disciplined since college 10 years earlier. And so I really needed to sort of get that habit, that pattern back. And then my second job was a full-time permanent mid-level administrative job, and then I got a job at a larger company as a supervisor, and I got a promotion there. And then at 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law School, and then I became a lawyer. I worked at a big law firm for a few years, and then I did class action work for the federal government. And then at 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal administrative law judge. And I took early retirement, and we can talk about what I'm doing now. But that was the trajectory. It wasn't like, let me get out and I'm going to have this, big career. My first career goal when I got home from rehab was, let's not get fired again. Like that was really my goal, Let's try to like hold on to a job. And so I wasn't happy about it, but I really did need to do that. I really needed to start at that lower level and just sort of build my way back up. Or build my way up for the first time, actually, for the first time.
Yes, and of course now you speak a lot about learning the skills because you didn't know those skills, so you had to learn to love yourself and to find yourself worthy going through this again. Why law?
Well, I will say, so when I was young, I was very verbal and I was argumentative. And I mean, I could like beat the grown-ups at arguments. And so since I was a little girl, people would tell me, you would make a good lawyer. So it was always in the back of my mind, to do that. And so that's what I ended up doing. But I mean, I was 39 when I went to law school because, I didn't get sober till 32, right? And so I was 39 when I went to law school, 42 when I graduated. So it was a sort of what would have for someone else been a mid-career change, right? But for me, it was really only 6 years into my career because I had wasted the first 10. And so it was always something that I thought maybe I would be good at that. And so I found it, but it was scary. It was scary to apply, to risk the rejection, and to go back to school. I mean, when I started law school, it was 16 years after I graduated college. 16 years.
Wow.
And so, it's a little nerve-wracking. Like, I haven't taken a test in 16 years. And now it's a law school test, so it was a little nerve-wracking, but it was the right move. It was the right move.
And how much courage did you have to do to actually do that and not run away from it?
Yeah. I mean, I will say I was better with my anxiety by the time I got to law school, but it was 6.5 years sober. I was still working on it. And so I could still spin, I could still get into these anxiety spins about it. But the thing was, this was what was interesting about it. Despite my anxiety, I was doing the right things. You know what I mean? Like, I was making the right next steps. The anxiety was preventing me from actually enjoying my success as much as I sort of deserved to enjoy it. I couldn't feel the success as much as I should have because I was always focused on, but tomorrow something horrible is going to happen. Tomorrow I'm going to lose it all. And so that was one of the real negatives for me of my trauma history, was that it took me a long time to be able to sort of to feel trust in the world and to feel sort of like I wasn't at risk every second of every day of something horrible happening. Yeah.
Yes. How are you feeling have you moved through that now? Or are you still experiencing all that anxiety now?
So at the end of the 9 years, I would have said I was probably 80% recovered, and now it's been a lot more years. And so I say I'm 92 to 95%, depending on the day. So I do get triggered occasionally, but it's much more rare, and it's not as severe, and it doesn't last that long. It doesn't go on for days and days and days. So I'm much, much, much better about it now, much better. And then I will say also, now I'm retired. And that's given me even more freedom, because now everything I do is by choice, and I'm not dealing with deadlines, and I don't have people's lives in my hand. And so, I was a lot better before I retired, but it's given me a new sort of I can take a deeper breath. There's less weight on my shoulders. I mean, the work I'm doing, I hope is important. I have my book out, which is really partly about sharing information and letting people see an example of an individual recovery. But also, I write opinion pieces like for the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times, and I do a lot of speaking at conferences. I train lawyers and judges. So because I'm a retired judge, it opened up service opportunities for me in a new way, because I could talk about my whole history now without worrying about professional ramifications. When I'm doing the work I'm doing, I still feel is important, but it's not that same kind of pressure as having a full-time, job with all that responsibility. So I'm actually very much enjoying this phase of my life.
I'm sure. I want to talk about that, but I wanted to go back just to the judge part, because, in our minds, like a judge is right high up, right? And there must be so much pressure, because you're dealing with people. You've got people, like you were saying, you're playing with people's lives. I mean, I'm up, I'm making it. How did you deal with that pressure without relapsing?
Yeah, I mean, by the time I became a judge, like I said, I had 20 years sober. I mean, relapsing wasn't really on the table, but it was really more, how do I deal with the pressure without having the anxiety sucking under, which would have been more likely. But yeah, you have a lot of pressure as a lawyer too. It's different. As a lawyer, you feel the pressure of getting a good result for your client. And a lot of times those are also life-altering cases, right? But some of the law I did was business law, and that's more of a financial impact. I mean, don't get me wrong, I cared about the result. I do my best work to get the result that they wanted. But as a judge, you do have that different feeling of I'm making a decision and there's a real world impact on this decision. This person's life is impacted by my decision. And so you do have to learn how to handle that stress. And for me, it was trying to develop sort of patterns, time management techniques so that I could be efficient and therefore not feel behind in work, you know what I mean, that I was keeping up because I was doing things efficiently. But also trying to make sure that I was as consistent as I could be, you know, like from one case to the next, and
Yes,
spend
yes,
time really
yes.
thinking about it up front. Because most cases aren't brand new. There's something you dealt with something similar. This is different in this way and different in that way, but it's not starting from zero, right? And so I'm trying to develop thinking ahead about what I thought was a fair balance of the factors, and then trying to apply them to the specific facts. But it is pressure, and you do feel. I mean, there were times where I wish I could have done something different than I did, but the law constrained me. This is what I was legally required to do. So
Oh,
sometimes you don't even
yes.
agree with the outcome, but I wasn't a type of judge where I could change the law. I really had to follow the law. And so those were particularly hard cases.
Yes, yes. And how did you deal with those?
Yeah, I mean, you talk to other judges, you know, especially in the beginning, about what, you know, the pressure, the stress, or how do they handle it when. I mean, that's one good thing. You do have that community. Like I was my judge. I went to like a training for judge. We called it judge school. I went to judge school. And so I had classmates, like there were 35 of us together. And so we sort of had a community where we would talk to each other, or, you know, if we felt that we were questioning a decision, or how would you approach this, or how do you handle it when you feel upset that sort of the rules are forcing you to do something that you wish you didn't have to do, and all of that. And so it comes back a little bit to that community point, right? That support point.
Yes, yes, yes. I think we realizing now how important community is, and you've showed it throughout this conversation. So, when did you decide that you didn't want to be a judge anymore and you retired? What was the breaking point, or not?
I mean, I was, you know, I was getting a little older, although I retired. I always say I did early retire, early retire. But I was also, to be honest, I was having some medical issues that didn't preclude me from doing some things, but they really do preclude me from working full time. And so I thought about sort of, well, what do I want the rest of my life to look like if I can't do this? And then I really thought it would be a new opportunity. And so I didn't feel I was able to transition into it, I think, smoother because I had a plan for the future. I mean, part of it is thinking about what am I able to do, and what do I enjoy doing? How do I have my retirement world include mostly the things I like doing? I mean, nothing's only the things you like doing, right? But that I could have a higher percentage of things that I like doing, because I get to sort of frame it and control it and decide. But at the same time, it was a building up process. I didn't know that I would be able to be as successful as I have been at getting the book published and getting speaking engagements, and, you know, hitting some higher end publications like the Wall Street Journal, for God's
It's
sakes.
amazing. It's really
But
amazing.
yes, so you don't know, but I'm also on the board for Life Ring Secular Recovery and She Recovers. So I got to really think about like I like speaking, I like writing, I like sort of that team engagement of being, you know, on the boards. And so you do get to think about, what do I like to do, and where are my skills, and what kind of organization would I like to apply my skills to, right? I mean, there's always many different volunteer opportunities that you could do, and it's really, I think, sort of picking your lane, you know. And so this is where I decided to focus.
So obviously, are you focusing on the recovery community per se? Because I know you just mentioned a few.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely my areas. I definitely substance use, substance recovery, but also trauma recovery, mental health recovery, and the interplay. I mean, when I train, one of the things I talk about is the interplay between mental health and recovery. But I train lawyers and judges about, like, some of the things I think they're not always doing right in regard to substance use in their, you know, when they're making decisions about say, custody cases or criminal cases or drug courts. Drug courts, some do well and some can do a lot better. So it's sort of that educational side. But I also think I try to use my judge title as sort of an ear opener. Like I feel like right now it's sort of a tool. And so I'll talk to people and literally explain them what is substance use disorder? Like, what's the definition? What are the treatment options? I talk to friends and family about, different treatment options or what they can do to help their family member and what they shouldn't do because it can have a negative impact. I train about multiple paths to recovery, right? That there's not just one way to recover. There are many ways, many effective ways. And I'll share about the different peer support groups and all of that. So I try to have it educational, but also stigma reducing. I mean,
Yes.
One reason I wanted to own up to shooting meth is because when I see people shooting meth in the media or in television shows, they're really presented sort of like they're hopeless and to be despised, like they're not worthy of our sympathy or our empathy. And so I really wanted to say out loud, that I shot meth for a long time, and yet look what my life has been like in recovery. In other words, let's not give up on them. They deserve our help. They deserve our understanding, but hopefully we can also offer them help and a way out.
Yes, yes. This is Break Fear, Find Freedom. And a lot of times the stigma is because people are so afraid. They don't know. They're not educated enough. Like, what do you do if you see someone shooting meth or lying on the street? A lot of people, they don't know how to behave. So that education piece is so important. So thank you for that. Yes.
Yes. And I will say that right now, I know in a lot of countries, there's the public drug use is what's really frustrating people, right? But part of that is about housing. It's not really just about the substance use. It's about people being unhoused, and sometimes they get conflated. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand why you don't want people shooting drugs in a public space or in front of your house. But we just need to understand the problem, the actual factors that are creating the problem, so that we can get the right solutions in place to resolve it. Sometimes we lead to let's incarcerate more people, and that actually doesn't work very well. But it's also seems simple. It seems like what we know and what should work, but it actually doesn't work very well. So it's partially educating people about that. Like when I tell people that you could treat 3 or 4 people for the same amount of money that you incarcerate one, that's often a big eye opener for them. That we're actually wasting our tax dollars by incarcerating people when we could be treating so many more
Yes.
people with the same amount of money.
Yes, I agree with you. And sometimes that's people because the problem, with the unhoused people, it's such a problem. It's easy to say, let's just incarcerate them and forget about them. And again, that education piece is so important. Because people just don't understand. And also we can blame the media. Blame is, you can say the media, because you say if someone's unhoused, they're obviously unworthy. If someone's using, they are unworthy. And it's not that simple.
No, and the reality is that I know in the U.S. in particular, we talk as if when we're discussing drug policy, there's often this assumption that there's sort of readily available treatment for everybody, but there isn't.
No.
And so, I mean, a lot of people can't get treatment. We certainly don't even have enough mental health treatment separate, in addition to not enough substance treatment. And so there are a lot of people that can't get into programs. They're not available to them. If you don't have insurance and you don't have cash. But also, if someone's unhoused, that's a complicated situation. They usually have multiple issues going on, and they need, sort of what we call wraparound services, right? They need housing help. They need probably mental health treatment help. They probably have physical issues that need help. And they've had, being unhoused is a trauma in and of itself, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's a very traumatic situation. And so, I'd like to say I wish I had a simple solution for these problems. I don't have a simple solution, but I just want to educate people so that they're more likely to come up with a solution that will ultimately improve the situation.
Yes. Yes, and then I think what we need to look at as well is going back to community. If we can all come together, all the non-profits and everyone that has a solution, come together as a community and create a solution that's better than what's happening right now. Because even with the unhoused situation, there's people that can't get beds, or they do go into detox for a bit, and then after a week they get thrown back into the streets, and then OD, obviously, because of fentanyl, or because their bodies are cleaner and they're using more, the same amount, but it's a really quite a situation we're in right now.
That's true. I mean, that happens when people get released from jail too. Is that the overdose death rate of people, like within a week of being released from being incarcerated, is very high compared to the general population, and that's exactly why. I mean, there's just a big push now in the U.S. to make sure that when they leave, they're offered drugs, right? For opioid use disorder, there are very successful medications. There's methadone and buprenorphine, which reduce the overdose death rate by more than half, and they increase the odds of successful recovery. And yet we don't offer them to enough people. I think like 10% of the people who could benefit from them get them in the U.S. It's very, very low, and there's a lot of complicated reasons. But yeah, if somebody's being released from detox and they have an opioid use disorder, they should be offered, even if you can't get them a treatment bed, which, that's the problem if you can't get them a treatment bed, but at least give them medication so that they can survive out there, and they will have a lower likelihood of having a fatal overdose.
So you're working with a whole lot of things. Tell me a bit about, because you mentioned some other recovery programs that you work with. Why do you stand behind them? What makes them better than something else?
Yeah, and it's not that they're better, it's that they're better for some people, right? Like, I wouldn't say my programs are right for everybody either. What I want people to know is that they have options so they can find the right fit. But the two programs that I'm on the board for, one of them is LifeRing Secular Recovery, and LifeRing focuses on what I did, which is the personal nature of the recovery plan. That you and I are different people, different circumstances, different levels of severity of our substance use, and therefore our plans are going to be different. Yes. And so LifeRing's secular in that we don't require a higher power as part of our program, but a lot of our members are faith-based, and we don't care about that at all. It's that we focus on the group helping you build the individual plan that's going to work for you. That's sort of a key idea. And then She Recovers is not just for substance use recovery, it's also for trauma recovery, mental health, other behavioral disorders like gambling or eating, grief, overwork, because most of the women that are recovering from an addiction have one or more of those other things to work on too. And in She Recovers, you can work on it together as sort of an interrelated recovery. In other words, you don't just work on your eating over here and your drug use over there. You can work on it all together because there's an interplay in the recoveries. And so that's what She Recovers offers. So it isn't that they're better than 12 Steps or any other program. It's that this is what they offer, and this is going to be a better fit for many people. Yes,
I love that, because recovery is a personal thing, and there's no one way to recover. Everyone recovers differently. I just thought, as you were speaking, I was thinking about what are your ideas or your thoughts of intervention. So a lot of times you have, and I know I had to mention this. You have the person within the household that keeps relapsing and keeps going into the system or whatever it is, and a lot of the family are at wit's end, so they decide to do an intervention.
So intervention is sort of a tough love-based approach, and the data shows about 30% of the time interventions actually are successful. But there's a better approach. It's called, for friends and family. So it's called craved, community reinforcement and family training. It has about a 60% success rate, so double what the tough love approach has. And it's based on positive reinforcement, but it's also based on practical techniques as far as things like having a conversation about what purpose, what is the drug doing for you? Like, what need is it meeting? And can we meet that need in another way? It talks a lot about the families, what they can and can't help with. You know, like, for example, that the individual that's struggling with the substance, they need to be the decision maker. It's more effective to say to them, look, I've done some research and here's 3 programs I thought you might be interested in. Do any of these appeal to you, than to say, you're going here, you're going down, or you're doing it my way. And so it's not that families can't set any boundaries, like about, they don't have to be financially abused or verbally abused or any of that, but if the craft approach is more about positive reinforcement. And there is a really excellent book based on craft techniques, and it's called Beyond Addiction, and there's a workbook. If I have a friend or family member that is struggling with substances and I wanted to figure out what can I actually effectively do to help them, I would read Beyond Addiction. It's really an excellent book for friends and family.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mary Beth. And also, but the thing is, a lot of times with my experience is that a lot of times when the substance user goes into rehab, comes out and goes back into the same kind of family dynamics, the triggers are all there, and the family hasn't really, they're still behaving in the same way. So it becomes like, how do I deal with this? If I get back into this family dynamic, I'm going to have to use again because everything's the same and I'm different. Do you get what I'm saying? What about actually healing the family as well?
Yeah, so I mean, there are support groups for family members too. There's Al-Anon, which is the 12-step based support group, but there are non-12-step approaches. Smart Recovery has friends and family groups. LifeRing, Secular Recovery has friends and family, and there are many others. And those can help the friends and family talk to other friends and family and sort of release some of their emotion and get support and feel supported. There are definitely therapists that can specialize in helping the family rebuild a more positive relationship. And for the person with substances, the truth is that it's an important part of your recovery plan in early recovery to really decide who you can have in your life at that point. And sometimes it's not everybody. And I mean, if you feel like a friend or family member isn't safe for you in early recovery, that doesn't mean you have to cut them out forever. It may just mean you need to not see them for 90 days or 6 months. It may mean that you could email with them, but not see them in person, or have a phone call because you can control the email a little better, whatever that might be. It is a really important consideration for someone in early recovery to decide who is safe, who can I be safe with in my circle right now? Who has to sort of wait for me to get to a point that I can handle them?
Yes, I love that. Thank you. Mary Beth, where can people find you if they want to, I don't know, call you or get you to as a speaker, to speak with you, or you to speak at the event? How?
Yeah, so my book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is available on Amazon, worldwide, and so there's that. My website is junkietoJudge.com, and there's like my op-eds are there and other information, but you can message me through my website, and I answer all messages that I get. And then also I'm on Twitter at Mary Beth O_. And I will say, I do not argue with people on Twitter, but I do provide the new studies that come out, the articles about substance use and recovery, and my recovery thoughts. And so if people are interested in those, they can follow me there.
Perfect, thank you. And obviously all this information will be in the description box below. Mary Beth, have you found freedom?
I think I have. I really do feel. I feel like I'm able to live the life that I want, and that I've built a healthy, happy life around me. And so I do feel free of the kind of stressors that I used to have and of the sort of the negative emotional turmoil that I used to be in. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
It is. And I can say you look beautiful. You've got a beautiful energy. So thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And again, anybody wants to reach out to Mary Beth, all the information will be in the description box. Thank you, Mary Beth. This was beautiful. I love this conversation. Thank you so much. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.